Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nittai Gaura, Hari Bol. Astottara Satya Srimad. His Divine Loving Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajapacharya. Astottara Satya Srimad. His Divine Loving Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Mahārāja Prabhupada ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda śāradvataḥ Gadādhara Śrivāsadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki Brajabhumi Sri Vrindavan Dham ki Shri Navadip Mayapur Dham ki Purushottam Kshetra Jagannath Puri Dham ki Samavita Bhakta Vrinda ki Jnātayaḥ Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Shri Shri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So, thank you very much for coming to this morning's class. So this morning we'll be covering text 3 to 4 of the 13th chapter, the first canto of Bhagavatam. The 13th chapter is entitled Dhṛtarāṣṭro Quits Home. And this is text 3 and text 4. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Tam bandhum āgataṁ dṛṣṭvā dharma-putraḥ saha-anujaḥ dhṛtarāṣṭro yuyutsuś sūtaḥ śāradvataḥ pṛthā Gāndhārī Draupadī brahman Subhadrā cottarā Kṛpī anyāś jāmayaḥ pāṇḍor jñātayaḥ sa-sutāḥ striyaḥ. May I read? Like to recite? It's 4. Okay, so just recite number 4. Vaishnavis. Okay, so 2 verses. I'll read the word for word for the verse on the board first, and then I'll read for the... No, actually I'll do both. Okay. Tam, him, bandhum, relative, āgataṁ, having arrived there, dṛṣṭvā, by seeing it, dharma-putraḥ, Yudhiṣṭhira, saha-anujaḥ, along with his younger brothers, dhṛtarāṣṭro, dhṛtarāṣṭro, yuyutsuś, satyaki, cha, and sūtaḥ, Sanjaya, śāradvataḥ, Kṛpācārya, pṛthā, Kunti, Gāndhārī, Gāndhārī, Draupadī, brahman, O brahmanas, Subhadrā, cha, and uttara, Kṛpī, anyāś, others, cha, and jāmayaḥ, wives of other family members, pāṇḍor, of the Pandavas, jñātayaḥ, family members, sa-sutāḥ, along with their sons, striyaḥ, the ladies. Translation: when they saw Vidura return to the palace, all the inhabitants, Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira, his younger brothers, dhṛtarāṣṭro, Satyaki, Sanjaya, Kṛpācārya, Kunti, Gāndhārī, Draupadī, Subhadrā, Uttara, Kṛpī, many other wives of the Kauravas and other ladies with children, all hurried to him in great delight. It so appeared that they had regained their consciousness after a long period. I'll read the purport because it's a long purport, so I have to be a bit more swift. So we won't do the repeating the words. Purport: Gāndhārī, the ideal chaste lady in the history of the world. She was the daughter of Mahārāja Subal, the king of Gāndhār, now Kandahar in Kabul. And in her maiden state, she worshipped Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is generally worshipped by Hindu maidens to get a good husband. Gāndhārī satisfied Lord Shiva, and by his benediction to obtain 100 sons, she was betrothed to dhṛtarāṣṭro, despite his being blind forever. When Gāndhārī came to know that her would-be husband was a blind man, to follow her life companion, she decided to become voluntarily blind. So she wrapped up her eyes with many silk linens, and she was married to dhṛtarāṣṭro under the guidance of her elder brother Shakuni. She was the most beautiful girl of her time, and she was equally qualified by her womanly qualities, which endeared every member of the Kaurava court. But despite all her good qualities, she had the natural frailties of a woman, and she was envious of Kunti when the latter gave birth to a male child. Both the queens were pregnant, but Kunti first gave birth to a male child. Thus Gāndhārī became angry and gave a blow to her own abdomen. As a result, she gave birth to a lump of flesh only. But since she was a devotee of Vyasadeva, by the instruction of Vyasadeva, the lump was divided into 100 parts, and each part gradually developed to become a male child. Thus, her ambition to become the mother of 100 sons was fulfilled, and she began to nourish all the children according to her exalted position. When the intrigue of the battle of Kurukshetra was going on, she was not in favor of fighting with the Pandavas. Rather, she blamed dhṛtarāṣṭro, her husband, for such a fratricidal war. She desired that the state be divided into two parts, for the sons of Pandhu and her own. She was very affected when all her sons died in the battle of Kurukshetra, and she wanted to curse Bhīmasena and Yudhiṣṭhira, but she was checked by Vyasadeva. Her mourning over the death of Duryodhana and Dushasana before Lord Krishna was very pitiful, and Lord Krishna pacified her by transcendental messages. She was equally aggrieved on the death of Karna, and she described to Lord Krishna the lamentation of Karna's wife. She was pacified by Srila Vyasadeva when he showed her dead sons, then promoted to the heavenly kingdoms. She died along with her husband in the jungles of the Himalayas near the mouth of the Ganges. She burnt in a forest fire. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira performed the death ceremony of his uncle and aunt. Pṛthā, daughter of Mahārāja Shurasena and sister of Vasudeva, Lord Krishna's father. Later, she was adopted by Mahārāja Kunti Bhoj, and hence she is known as Kunti. She is the incarnation of the success potency of the personality of Godhead. The heavenly denizens from the upper planets used to visit the palace of King Kunti Bhoj, and Kunti was engaged for their reception. She also served the great mystic Durvasa, and being satisfied by her faithful service, Durvasa Muni gave her a mantra by which it was possible for her to call for any demigod she pleased. As a matter of inquisitiveness, she at once called for the sun god, who desired couplement with her, but she declined. But the sun god assured her immunity from virgin adulteration, and so she agreed to his proposal. As a result of this couplement, she became pregnant, and Karna was born by her. By the grace of the sun, she again turned into a virgin girl, but being afraid of her parents, she quitted the newly born child, Karna. After that, when she actually selected her own husband, she preferred Pandhu to be her husband. Maharaj Pandhu later wanted to retire from family life and adopt the renounced order of life. Kunti refused to allow her husband to adopt such life. But at last, Maharaj Pandhu gave her permission to become a mother of sons by calling some other suitable personalities. Kunti did not accept his proposal at first, but when vivid examples were set by Pandhu, she agreed. Thus, by dint of the mantra awarded by Durvasa Muni, she called for Dharmaraj, and thus Yudhiṣṭhira was born. She called for the demigod Vayu, air, and thus Bhima was born. She called for Indra, the king of heaven, and thus Arjuna was born. The other two sons, named Nakul and Sahadeva, were begotten by Pandhu himself in the womb of Madri. Later on, Maharaj Pandhu died at an early age, for which Kunti was so aggrieved that she fainted. Two co-wives, namely Kunti and Madri, decided that Kunti should live for the maintenance of the 5 minor children, the Pandavas, and Madri should accept the sati rituals by meeting voluntary death along with her husband. This agreement was endorsed by great sages like Satasringa and others present on the occasion. Later on, when the Pandavas were banished from the kingdom by the intrigues of Duryodhana, Kunti followed her sons, and she equally faced all sorts of difficulties during those days. During the forest life, one demon, Hindimba, wanted Bhima as a husband, Bhima refused, but when the girl approached Kunti and Yudhiṣṭhira, they ordered Bhima to accept her proposal and give her a son. As a result of this combination, Ghatotkacha was born, and he fought very valiantly with his father against the Kauravas. In their forest life, they lived with a Brahmana family that was in trouble because of one Bakasura demon, and Kunti ordered Bhima to kill the Bakasura to protect the Brahmana family against troubles created by the demon. She advised Yudhiṣṭhira to start for the Panchala Desh. Draupadī was gained in this Panchala Desh by Arjuna, but by order of Kunti, all 5 of the Pandavas' brothers became equally the husbands of Panchali, or Draupadī. She was married with 5 Pandavas in the presence of Vyasadeva. Kunti Devi never forgot her first child, Karna, and after Karna's death in the battle of Kurukshetra, she lamented and admitted before other sons that Karna was her eldest son prior to her marriage with Maharaj Pandu. Her prayers for the Lord after the battle of Kurukshetra, when Lord Krishna was going back home, are excellently explained. Later, she went to the forest with Gāndhārī for severe penance. She used to take meals after each 30 days. She finally sat down in profound meditation and later burned to ashes in a forest fire. Draupadī, the most chaste daughter of Mahārāja Drupad and partly an incarnation of goddess Sachi, the wife of Indra. Mahārāja Drupad performed the great sacrifice under the superintendence of the sage Yaja. By his first offering, Dṛṣṭvā was born, and by the second offering, Draupadī was born. She is therefore the sister of Dṛṣṭvā, and she is also named Panchali. The 5 Pandavas married her as a common wife, and each of them begot a son in her. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira begot a son named Pṛthivīt. Bhimasen begot a son named Sutasam. Arjuna begot Shrutakirti. Nakul begot Shatanika, and Sahadeva begot Shrutakarma. She is described as a most beautiful lady, equal to her mother-in-law, Kunti. During her birth, there was an arrow message that she should be called Krishna. The same message also declared that she was born to kill many a Kshatriya. By dint of her blessings from Shankara, she was awarded 5 husbands, equally qualified. When she preferred to select her own husband, princes and kings were invited from all the countries of the world. She was married with the Pandavas during the exile in the forest. But when they went back home, Mahārāja Drupad gave them immense wealth as a dowry. She was well received by all the daughters-in-law of dhṛtarāṣṭro. When she was lost in a gambling game, she was forcibly dragged into the assembly hall, and an attempt was made by Dushasana to see her naked beauty, even though there were elderly persons like Bhishma and Drona present. She was a great devotee of Lord Krishna, and by her praying, the Lord himself became an unlimited garment to save her from the insult. A demon of the name Jatashul kidnapped her, but her second husband, Bhimasen, killed the demon and saved her. She saved the Pandavas from the curse of Maharshi Durvasa by the grace of Lord Krishna. When the Pandavas lived incognito in the palace of Virat, Kichak was attracted by her exquisite beauty, and by arrangement with Bhima, and the devil was killed, and she was saved. She was very much aggrieved when her 5 sons were killed by Ashwatthama and fell on the way. The cause of her falling was explained by Yudhiṣṭhira. But when Yudhiṣṭhira entered the heavenly planet, he saw Draupadī gloriously present there as the goddess of fortune in the heavenly planet. Subhadrā, daughter of Vasudeva and sister of Lord Sri Krishna. She was not only a very dear daughter of Vasudeva, but also a very dear sister to both Krishna and Baladeva. The 2 brothers and sister are represented in the famous Jagannath temple of Puri, and the temple is still visited by thousands of pilgrims daily. This temple is in remembrance of the Lord's visit at Kurukshetra during an occasion of solar eclipse and his subsequent meeting with the residents of Vrindavan. The meeting of Radha and Krishna during this occasion is a very pathetic story. And Lord Sri Chaitanya, in the ecstasy of Radharani, always pined for Lord Sri Krishna at Jagannath Puri. While Arjuna was at Dwarka, he wanted to have Subhadrā as his queen, and he expressed his desire to Lord Krishna. Sri Krishna knew that his elder brother, Lord Baladev, was arranging her marriage elsewhere, and since he did not dare to go against the arrangement of Baladev, he advised Arjuna to kidnap Subhadrā. So when all of them were on a pleasure trip in the Raivata hill, Arjuna managed to kidnap Subhadrā according to the plan of Sri Krishna. Sri Baladev was very angry at Arjuna, and he wanted to kill him. But Lord Krishna implored his brother to excuse Arjuna. Then Subhadrā was duly married with Arjuna, and Abhimanyu was born of Subhadrā. At the premature death of Abhimanyu, Subhadrā was very mortified. But on the birth of Parikshit, she was happy and solaced. Srila Prabhupada ki Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prichdaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. So this section of Bhagavatam is dealing with a description of the devotees who attended the return of Vidura. And the previous verses, Prabhupada discusses the male-bodied attendees. In this verse, particular purport, Prabhupada discusses the female-bodied attendees. And he dedicates a whole purport, about 3 pages long purport, discussing in detail the different attributes and the history of all the female attendees, all the key female attendees. And it's quite interesting because this actually highlights a very important aspect and goes against a principle that is often used by people who oppose the teachings of the Bhagavatam and the teachings of Vedic culture, where they claim that Vedic culture is actually quite repressive and suppresses females, women. So according to some people, they say that the Bhagavatam and the Vedas and followers of the Vedas are basically, they've created a culture in which women cannot flourish because there are so many aspects of the Vedic literatures that contain statements that are not understood in proper context and come across as misogynistic. But this particular purport here highlights how this is actually the opposite. Here's the Founder Acharya Prabhupada spending the whole purport describing these ladies and bringing out all the different qualities that they have. So the reason why the Vedic literatures and the Vedic culture emphasizes separation of the gender is not actually because of misogyny. It's actually because to attain God realization, the Acharyas explain that one has to overcome at the basic level, bare minimum level, the 6 impulses. The urge to speak, the demands of the tongue, demands of the genital, demands of the mind, and the belly, and what was the other one? Anger, right? And out of these 6 impulses, the Acharyas explain that the most profound and the most difficult to overcome is the urge of the genitals, because this is the most binding force in this material world, because it's actually a direct reflection of the Adi Rasa, which is the rasa and the relationship between Krishna and the gopis, right? So what is considered the highest in the spiritual world, when it manifests in the material world, becomes the most binding force. And it's explained that one who's able to control this urge is actually control most of the other urges. But if one cannot control any of these urges, one cannot achieve God realization. Right? And even in Srila Rupa Goswami's Nectar of Instruction, Acharyas explained that that verse actually does not even begin the section of bhakti. It's actually just to make you a human being, the ability to control your 6 urges. So that's the beginning of spiritual life, to control the mind, the anger, and the genitals, right? That's pure Shraddha, just the preliminary stage of the 9 steps of devotional service. Shraddha, bhajana, kriya, sadhu sangha, like that. Sadhu. So the Vedic culture, recognizing this, is organized society in such a way that the separation of the sexes is established just to minimize the potential attraction, right? Because this attraction is so strong. There's a pastime where I believe it was Vyasadeva was giving a lecture to his disciples, right? And he was talking about this same attraction between male and female. And there was one of the disciples, I think it was Jaimini, Rishi, or someone else, who couldn't believe, he felt this was hyperbole. You say, this is a bit of an exaggeration. How can he say that if I'm a self-control sage, if I want to control my senses, then I'm sure a woman's allurements will not affect me in any way, because I've spent so many years performing so much tapasya and I developed such sense control. And Vyasadeva was smirking to himself and thinking, this disciple needs to be taught a lesson because he hasn't understood. So what happened is that he gave him some time, and in the evening that same day, this disciple was taking rest, so things seemed normal. And it started raining heavily. And out of nowhere in the middle of the night, he heard the voice of a young lady calling out for help. And he thought to himself, who's this out there in the rain at this time of night? So he looked out, and there, lo and behold, there was a young lady who was drenched, wet, because for some reason she ended up in the rain and she had no shelter. So he's in his room, he's on his own, and he wasn't sure whether or not he should provide her the assistance that she obviously looked like she needed. But still he went ahead and he let her in, he gave her shelter. He said, I'll help you, but you have to stay over there. That's the other side of the room, and I'm going to stay over here. Because she was soaking wet, her top was wet, and so many things were visible. For him, this is not very, he didn't want to be, spend too much time around her because he might be affected. But because he'd already seen something, he went to lie down, but the thought was still spinning around in his head. It was still dwelling on whatever little bit he had seen. And he was trying hard to control this urge and this impulse, but it grew and grew and grew and grew until he couldn't control himself anymore. And he got up and he started to walk towards the corner of the room where he knew she was lying down, to try something with her. And as he started walking there, Vyasadeva appeared. And it turned out it was Vyasadeva who would come in the form of this lady to show him, to prove to him that actually the energy between the male and female is so strong that even you can be affected. And he realized how silly it was. There's also a pastime of a sage who basically retired from normal society and went into seclusion to meditate and perform austerity. And somehow he came in contact with one of the heavenly damsels, and through her association he was so affected that he dropped semen. Even though he spent so many years performing austerities, he somehow dropped semen, and semen fell into the river. And a female deer came and drank this water, and she became pregnant, and she gave birth to a child who had the form of a half man, half deer. He had horns of a deer, right, and the form of a man. Now this sage was so upset that he basically fell down through like a few moments association with this lady, that he vowed that he bring up this child in such a way that the child will never be exposed to the opposite sex, right? So he took his child to a secluded place, and then he trained this child for years. But in the kingdom nearby, there was another king whose kingdom had been going through a drought because he accidentally offended some brahmanas. And the brahmanas were upset, and then they said that we're not going to help you with this drought. So the misfortune, the drought went on for so many years. Then at one point somebody told him that the best way to get rid of this drought is to find a devotee who's performed celibacy to the strictest level for many years, right? And then bring him to your kingdom, and the moment he sets foot in your kingdom, the rains will drop again. And this boy lives next door in this sage's hermitage. But this sage will not accept this idea because he's made a vow that he will not allow his son to come in contact with mundane society or anything like that. So then the king had to come up with a trick, and what he did is that he hired some courtesans, some girls from his kingdom, very beautiful girl, and then he sent them over to try to tempt this little boy. And they went dressed as boys. So they're dressed in trousers and everything, or whatever the boys, not trousers, but dhotis, whatever male bodies will be wearing at the time. So they came to this place, and the father was not around. He had gone to the forest to collect some kind of roots or things for various purposes. So the boy sees these boys. He doesn't know they're girls, but the energy is so strong that despite not knowing they're girls, he gets affected by it. And the father comes back, and they have to leave because they don't want to get caught by the father. But the thought, that interaction with the girls lingers in his mind, even though he doesn't even know they're girls. He's thinking they're boys, but because he was associating with them so closely, it lingered in his mind where it started to affect the rest of his activities. And then eventually they came back again later on, and the father went away, because this strategy to try to lure the boy was two-part. They couldn't do it in one go. They came back again, and that time he was more favorable. He had been softened by the first injection of association, so it was easier to catch him. They took him to the next kingdom, and he ended up staying there, marrying someone. And then the kingdom flourished, but his father lost his son. So these pastimes are there to highlight the power of the attraction between male and female. But the problem is that there are some people, when they hear these pastimes, they take them out of context and use it to subjugate ladies. And they use this pastime to preach in a way which is demeaning to souls in female bodies. Whereas these pastimes are actually designed to teach us the danger of the material world on both sides, male and female. Because the attraction between male and female is the most powerful force. And it's the perfect trick of the material energy because you catch two souls in this attraction. Any other type of conditioning is one-on-one, but with this is two. They get connected, and then the bond becomes stronger, and eventually they want to expand everything, and they forget the goal of spiritual life, going back to Godhead. So Vedic society was designed in such a way that although we have material desires, we fulfill them in a way which is controlled, which is regulated. So that society encouraged this segregation between the sexes, and encouraged regulated contact between the sexes. Because unregulated contact can lead to fall down. It's explained that there's 8 types of sex in Shastra. Just thinking of the opposite sex, in the strictest sense, is considered sex. What you speak of engaging in the activity. So therefore, there was a very careful structure to society. Society was structured in such a way to prevent this. But that doesn't mean that Vedic society was misogynistic. And this purport actually proves that. And when you look at Prabhupada's interaction with his female disciples also, it proved that. On one level, Prabhupada spoke about the dangers of close association. He talks about male is like butter, female are like fire, and we shouldn't put them together because the butter will melt. But when he was dealing with his lady disciples, he dealt with them with the utmost care and the utmost love. There's a pastime here in Mayapur, I believe, where one time his godbrothers, Prabhupada's godbrothers, had been invited to a program, and sannyasis had been invited to a program. And amongst the servers was one of the lady disciples, I believe it was Yamuna Mataji. Malati Mataji was serving. And Prabhupada could sense that the godbrothers were getting a little bit disturbed that we're sannyasis and there's the woman serving us. You know, he could sense that. And he could also sense that she was feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the idea, right? Because she picked up on the vibe. So to encourage her, Prabhupada said to his guests, he said, you see this girl? She loves me so much that she'll cut her own throat for me. And I love her so much that I will do the same for her. Such a powerful statement coming from a sannyasi speaking about a female body, soul. But the point Prabhupada was saying there is that this girl is so dedicated to me that all these injunctions are being superseded here because her devotion goes beyond that. The thing with Vedic literatures is that on one level they're supposed to bring us to the topmost, which is paradharma, serving Krishna. But they make sure to give us instruction in such a way that we do not minimize the aparadharma, which means the way we're supposed to live in this material world religiously. So they will give us the goal. The goal of life is to go back to God. The devotional service is the highest. Bhagavad is the highest. Hearing and chanting is the highest. But until you reach that stage, you need to understand who you are. You need to understand what this world is about. And you have to live in this world accordingly. So we need to understand the limitation and the potential pitfalls of being in this material body. And sex desire is one of those. So we should not misunderstand the statements of Shastra when it says, when it encourages the separation of the sexes, or when it talks about different flaws of being, or shortcomings of being in a female body. Because the Shastra also talks about the flaws and the shortcomings of being in a male body. And if you go through the pastimes, the vast majority of people who do stupid things are in male bodies also, right? Indra is male and he runs around doing all sorts of nonsense. No offense to Indra, but I'm just making the point, right? So many sages do all sorts of nonsense. They're in a male body also, right? But at the same time, scripture says, okay, female body, why? Because it's very dangerous, it's very strong, so you have to be careful. Right? So we have to be careful that we do not get swayed by the current trend of the world outside, because ultimately the materialistic people, materialistic persons, do not appreciate anything that goes against their pursuit of sense enjoyment. And the Vedic scriptures and the Vedic culture is completely opposed to the unrestricted pursuit of sense enjoyment. So any flaw they can find, they'll capitalize on it, highlight it, and make it look like this is all the scripture is about. And we as devotees, because we are interacting to a certain degree with this society, we also get affected by their viewpoint and start to think that, yeah, you're right, the scriptures are a bit backwards. The scriptures are saying this. But the scriptures are not backwards. The statements are coming from particular platforms and they need to be understood in the proper context. When understood in the proper context, everything makes sense, right? The Shastra is talking from the point of view of going back to Godhead. You cannot go back to Godhead unless you learn to control your urges, the most destructive of which is the urge for sexual gratification. So here Prabhupada is going through these different souls, the history of all these different great souls, and here he's focusing on the ladies and highlighting how great their devotion actually is, right? So why were this lady and why were these male-bodied devotees attending this return of Vidura? Because Vidura was also another great devotee, right? And what made Vidura so special that all these people came to attend his return in such a rambunctious fashion, I believe that's the word, such a flamboyant fashion, is because Vidura was a great soul. Vidura was so great, and they said that when Krishna was leaving his body, Krishna was thinking of Vidura. Krishna appreciated Vidura's devotion to such an extent that as Krishna was leaving the body, the last person he thought about, or one of the last people he thought about, was Vidura. Right? What made Vidura so great was Vidura's dedication and devotion to the Pandavas. Throughout the Pandavas' ordeal, Vidura was always there to either speak in their defense and to protect them even when the Kauravas conspired to get rid of them. There's a pastime of how Duryodhan and Shakuni and the others tricked the the Pandavas and sent them to Varnavat, right? Told them to go there, that there was some ceremony going on, that they may enjoy the festivities, they should attend this. But the plan was to have them burnt in the house of luck. And Vidura knew this, and what Vidura did is that he sent them a warning as they were leaving in a different dialect than was spoken in our locality, because he knew not many people would understand, but only Yudhiṣṭhira would understand it. And he warned them to be careful. And Yudhiṣṭhira got the hint. And when I went to this place, they immediately understood what would happen. And even over there, Vidura also sent some of his assistants to help them. And so that's how the tunnel was dug, and the Pandavas were able to escape this forest and even escape this house. And even after they made it out of the tunnel, there was another person waiting, a boatman waiting to take them across. So Vidura was always dedicated to serving the Pandavas. And because of his devotion to the devotees, Krishna appreciated him also. So therefore in Shastra it's explained that even higher than serving the Supreme Lord is to serve the devotees of the Lord. Right? Because the devotees are dearer to the Lord than he himself is. The Lord is prepared to put himself in danger for the welfare of his devotees. So if someone can show the same appreciation, the same commitment and devotion for his devotees, the Lord appreciates that much more. Right? In South India, there's a pastime of Kanchipunam. Yeah? And he was a great devotee of Lord, what's his name? You might know, Prabhu. Vishnu from Varadaraj, yeah. So Kanchipunam was a great devotee of Varadaraj. He was actually one of the disciples of Yamunacharya. And he had such a close relationship with Varadaraj that they would sometimes conversate while he's rendering service to the Lord. You know? One time Prabhupada was visiting one temple in America, and the whole because he was coming, when Prabhupada comes, everyone goes, the Prabhupada's coming, Prabhupada, there's a whole mayhem. So the temple room is packed, right? So sometimes it's very hard to get by. So one time Prabhupada was visiting this temple in America, and there was one brahmachari there, maybe household, I don't know, but there's one devotee there. He was serving chai. He was waiting by the Chayanamrit pot. Chayanamrit, the pot was in front of the altar. So Prabhupada came to take darshan, but everyone was there was squashed in, so this devotee was close enough to Prabhupada to hear what Prabhupada was saying at the time. So Prabhupada was offering his respect to the deities, and he could hear Prabhupada saying words. And he could hear what Prabhupada was saying. And Prabhupada said, so, how are you? And there was a gap. There's no response. And Prabhupada goes, very good, very nice. Are they taking good care of you? Then there's a gap. Enough gap for someone to say something else, but no one is saying anything. But Prabhupada is looking at the deity. Okay. And then his devotee was thinking, wow, Prabhupada must be speaking to the deities. And then later on, Prabhupada went to sit on the asana to address the the devotees. And Prabhupada spoke about something that the deity had told him about how the care was being done and everything. So Prabhupada had a direct communication with the deity because of his devotion. So Kanchipunam was pure devotee, he could talk to the Lord. And what the rest of the devotees would do is that sometimes they'll ask him to ask something to Varadaraj, and then Varadaraj would tell them. So it'll be like a going between, just passing messages on and all of that stuff. So one time one devotee asked him, can you ask the Lord if I'm going to go to Vaikuntha? When am I going to go to Vaikuntha? So Kanchipunam went to Varadaraj and he asked him, and then the Lord told him, and then he went and told that devotee, and the devotee obviously was happy. So Kanchipunam is thinking, when will I go back to Vaikuntha? But he thought, no, this is not a good question to ask to the Lord. It's not, I'm there to serve him. So he didn't ask anything, he kept it to himself. But the Lord could read his mind, he could read his heart. So one day the Lord went to him and said, so, you have a question for me? You want to ask me something? He said, no, I don't have a question. He said, no, you can ask. And he goes, so I was wondering, will I go to Vaikuntha? When will I go to Vaikuntha? And then the Lord looked at him, smiling lovingly, he said, unfortunately, you won't get to go anywhere because you're not serving my devotees. He said, no, what? He's serving the Lord directly. He's not going to go back to Godhead. The other guy who's not serving the Lord directly will go back to Godhead. And the reason why is because he's not serving devotees, he's just serving the Lord directly. So Kanchipunam basically thought to himself, well, I'd have to do something about this. So he went off all over South India looking for a devotee to serve, but because he was famous all over South India as a great devotee, no one will allow him to serve him. So he was going around looking for somebody, no one would allow him, until he had this brilliant idea to change his cloth, because he was wearing saffron cloth, so he changed into white cloth, and he disguised himself as a cowherd, and he infiltrated the ashram of his own godbrother and started taking care of the cows there. For 6 months, he was taking care of the cows diligently, but he would always be careful to hide his identity. When a godbrother would come and try to start a conversation with him, he wouldn't answer, he would pretend to be dumb like Jad Bharat, and he would always shy away. But one day he got wet, and he needed to change, and he didn't have any white cloth at the time, so he had to change into a saffron cloth. And his godbrother happened to see him, and he immediately recognized him. He goes, my God, what did you do? I let you serve my cows and everything. I'm going to go to hell. And then he immediately left that place because obviously his plan fell apart. Then he went back. And as soon as he reached the altar, Varadaraj turned to him and said, you're going back to Godhead. Because you served my devotee for 6 months, you're going back to Godhead. So in the Shastra, it's explained that serving the devotees is the highest. There's a bunch of verses that I came across, and there's one very powerful verse that I think is very There's basically in Laghu Bhagavatamrita, as I was doing some research, there's a section in Laghu Bhagavatamrita. I was directed to that section through a lecture that I was hearing by His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu, where he was talking about the same pastime, how Vidura, the glories of Vidura started because he served the devotees. And there's a section in Laghu Bhagavatamrita which is dealing with the different gradations of devotees. And the beginning of that section, Rupa Goswami gives evidence to talk about the power of devotees in comparison to serving the Lord directly. And he finds verses from different scriptures to substantiate his points. And there's verses from Padma Puran This is a very nice verse in the Padma Purana. It says that this is from Uttarakhanda, Padma Purana. They who worship Lord Govinda but do not worship his devotees should not be known as devotees. They should be known only as proud hypocrites. And there's another verse. This is again from Padma Purana. This is very, very... Vaishnavas who serve the great devotees headed by Markandeya Muni, Maharaj Ambarish, Uparichar Vasu, Srila Vyasadeva, Vibhishan Maharaj, Pundarik, Maharaj Bali, Lord Shiva, Maharaj Prahlad, Sri Vidur, Dhruva Maharaj, Sri Dalbya, Parashara Muni, Bhishmadev and Narad Muni. If one serves Lord Krishna but does not serve them, he commits a great sin. So if we think that we can come to devotional service and it will just be us and the Lord and all these other people that can just mind their own business, I'll mind my business, I'll do my thing, you do your thing over there, and I'm going to go back to Godhead, it's impossible. In fact, it's considered to be a great offense. Right? And that's why in the Shastra, specifically in the Nectar of Instruction, Srila Rupa Goswami dedicates a whole section on how to engage in a relationship with the devotees. And that section is very important. Actually, that section, it takes you into like the other more important sections. So that means without the association of devotees, it's impossible to achieve any perfection. And we see in Shastra, nobody became a devotee without a devotee. What's his name? Dhruva Maharaj. He became a great devotee by the mercy of Narad Muni. Narad Muni became a great devotee by the mercy of the Bhaktivedantas. Who else is there? There is nobody who came to devotional service without the help of someone else. So when we come to the association of devotees, we should understand that at some point in a previous life, we got a great fortune to associate with devotees, and through that fortune, accumulated piety manifested into shraddha strong enough for us to want to take an interest in the process of devotional service. So we should take advantage of this great opportunity, and this is what this pastime here demonstrates, right? A great personality like Vidura is very dear to Krishna because of his devotion to the devotees of Krishna. And because he is dear to Krishna through his devotion to the devotees of Krishna, other devotees appreciate him because they realize that they won't get devotion to Krishna without devotion to him. So it's like a whole cycle. So every day we should take advantage of this opportunity. We may not be perfect, but by reading these pastimes, we remind ourselves of the potency and the importance of the association that we're in. So then we can take it more diligently and be more careful in our interactions. So even when we make mistakes, we can remedy them immediately and not think that everything is normal by offending the devotees. So these are some points. This is obviously a very long purport. In some ways, as a speaker who doesn't have much realization, a long purport is a blessing. I was laughing yesterday with a devotee who gave the class downstairs in Bengali. We were both happy that it's a long purport because you don't have to speak for too long, you don't have to waffle. But the key points that I got from this particular section is the importance of devotees, right? By the mercy of the devotees, Dhṛtarāṣṭro got liberated. By the mercy of he didn't achieve liberation immediately, but by the mercy of Vidura, Dhṛtarāṣṭro got liberated eventually. And by the mercy of the Pandavas, through serving the Pandavas, Vidura became dear to Krishna. So by the mercy of the devotees around us, we can also achieve perfection. So I'm very grateful to have been given this opportunity by your mercy to glorify the devotees association in the association of devotees. And I pray and hope that I may one day be able to apply whatever I've just spoken by some karmic ability, I can speak, I can move my lips, but it doesn't mean to say that I've actually internalized whatever I've just spoken. So I pray that I may be able to internalize it one day and be able to apply in my life. So I'm going to stop here. I did go over time. If anyone needs to leave, you may leave. But if there are any questions, I'll take a couple. Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhu, sometime association with a highly materialistic person is more dangerous than actually associating with women. That's worse than associating with women. So would you like to say something on that?
What, association with
a highly materialistic person, he'll actually affect your... I heard this in Bhagavatam, but I don't know where it is quoted, I don't know. But in a class I've heard this, that you associate with someone who is very materialistic. And
the understanding, what I heard, it's not materialistic, it's the association with a person who's attached to sex life is more dangerous than the association of a woman.
Yeah,
it's not highly materialistic. It's not like, okay, you're associating with someone who's ambitious, he wants to climb up the corporate ladder, is worse than... But in one sense, I don't think there's any particular distinction, because ultimately it will lead you to that, right? Material life ultimately just comes back around to sex life, if it's not regulated properly. Whatever you do, if you look at the world, the whole thing, everything pushing the material energy, everything pushing the living entities in this world is sex life, in the subtle form or the gross form. Why do we want to be great in society? So that eventually we can catch the attention of the opposite sex, and then we can enjoy the association with the opposite sex. Yeah, but the reason why I say that the association of someone who's attached is much more dangerous is that you develop the psychology, and the psychology and the temperament and the tendency is what pushes you forward much more, right? But a brief moment's association with the opposite sex is not the same as like extended association with someone, everything they're talking about is the opposite sex. Everything they're talking about is unrestricted association with the opposite sex. Because eventually, you develop some of the same tendencies as well, right? To develop the tendencies for a moment, you by yourself with the opposite sex for a brief period of time, it takes a bit of work. But that association, by hearing those words, your consciousness is changed. You take on the same qualities of the other person much more easily. Right? And when he's saying the association of the opposite sex also, it's like you can be in the same room with a female-bodied jiva, right? But if there's no, at least there's no intention to give you that kind of energy, it's not the same as sitting with someone whose whole mind and body and soul is drenched in the thirst for that kind of enjoyment, right? It's much more. It's not every time that when you see a woman, the thought of sex is coming to your mind. But when you're with that person, all they're thinking about is sex, it will rub off on you. Like that. So in that sense, it's much more dangerous. I remember I had to speak on this once, and I found something that explained this in more detail, but I forget it. But I hope this is sufficient. I don't know if it answers your question, but that's all I can think of at the moment. Does that help? What do you think? Would you like to share your thoughts? Please use the microphone.
My experience is like when I was working, and that time I had to associate with my colleagues. Mm-hmm. And you know what topics they talk, and that actually hits you, So in that sense also I was saying, because that kind of association is actually affecting more than, associating with, I mean, like, of course you cannot, but that thought came up in my mind, so I just...
Yeah, it's much more, I guess, because of... you can have a brief moment's association. You do your thing, you pass the salt, you move on. But when you're sitting there, they start to describe all the different interactions they've had, all the different names of people they've been with and all the different things, then it just stays in your head and like that. So, any other question or comment? Yes, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji, for the beautiful class. So, as you mentioned some examples from the scriptures about the danger from the opposite sex, so in the female body. So when we read these kind of statements, so it like create a fear or like to be very careful. So sometimes it bring a feeling of like anti-male, anti-female, no, like that. And as you mentioned, like in the devotion surpasses all these things. So in the mid of the extreme anti and the devotional, that level that surpasses, so in the mid of that struggling sadhak, so what should be the careful tips that one should keep in mind to advance spiritually?
So the question is basically that we can hear these warnings being given in scripture, and we can basically, sometimes that can make us so like scared, and we can become fanatic and almost offensive sometimes. Yeah. So how to avoid that tendency? Is your question, right?
Yeah, and because we being in organization, we are like serving together, Prabhuji's, Mataji. So
that's why when you make sure that you're absorbed in your service, then there's no thought. Right. The idea, in those times, there was a time when it was practical to enforce these rules and regulations. But because we're living in a society that is designed in such a way that the interaction has to be there, so we purify that, we make sure to purify the interaction by making sure that it's only centered around service. And anything outside of service should be avoided as much as possible. So the service is what basically acts as a prophylactic, right? In Sri Upanishad, it's explained that Krishna's association is antiseptic and prophylactic. And antiseptic means it basically cleans whatever infection is already there. Prophylactic means that it prevents any further infections from coming. So by being absorbed in service, absorbed in the chanting the holy name, then you will see a member of the opposite sex. And this is vice versa. The focus is not here like women, whatever body you are, if you're absorbed in the chanting the holy name, then you will see the other living entity as a soul, because you're getting your taste from somewhere else. You only see the world based on what your consciousness is like. So we only look at the world as a place to enjoy it because we have the materialistic tendencies. But when we have spiritual tendencies, then we look at the world as an arena with facilities to engage, unlimited facilities to engage in the service of the Lord, including members of the opposite sex. One time, one brahmachari, senior brahmachari, someone went to him and said, Prabhu, sometimes, it's difficult to go in temple downstairs, because this was in London. There's so many Matajis, even the Shinga Karacha Yagya, we're doing, and then you want to do Yagya, but then all these nicely dressed ladies are there. What to do? And he said, no, just look at them as Krishna's decorations. Krishna put them there, they're very beautiful to make the place look beautiful for his enjoyment. Right? There was a pastime also one time. Prabhupada was with his sannyasi disciples. And then a very beautiful lady came through. She paid her obeisances. And then she left. And then everyone was like, because the moment the woman is in the room, or vice versa, the moment the opposite is in the room, then people get self-conscious. You know, like men, whenever a woman's in the room, especially when you're younger, like immediately, they can be messing around among them, but then a girl walks in, then they'll start to speak with a deeper voice, try to be more careful in the way they pronounce words and everything, because immediately they become conscious and self-conscious. So that same thing happened. And then Prabhupada when goes, so? She's very beautiful, isn't it? Isn't she? And then Prabhupada goes, yes, Prabhupada. And he goes, What are you going to do about it? And then someone goes, nothing. And Prabhupada said, exactly. So that's the point. Just because somebody is beautiful, or just because somebody has particular characteristics, it doesn't mean to say they're for your enjoyment. Right? It's all for Krishna's enjoyment. So if we practice that, then we can overcome these tendencies. Of course, everything I'm saying here, I'm not saying because I have achieved that level. One time we asked one sannyasi to give class to brahmacharis in London again. And he agreed, but then he was like, he wasn't sure. He said, every time I give a class on brahmacharya and like the dangers of sex life and everything, the Maya tests me severely. And I get scared of giving brahmacharya class these days. So I'm not saying this because I am on that level, but I'm only repeating what the Shastra says. And it is said that the best way to overcome the attraction between the sexes is to channel that in the service of Krishna, right? Because ultimately, it is only a perverted reflection of the original attraction between Krishna and the gopis, the Adhirasa. So all we have to do is just revert back to the original, like that. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'll stop here. I'm really sorry I went over time. And I apologize if I said anything out of line. It wasn't my intention to offend anyone, so if I have, please forgive me. And please give me your blessings so that I may be able to apply whatever I've spoken in my own life. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.